All right, this may be my first ever interview with someone from the great state of Delaware. Here I am with Kent Jordan. How are you?
I'm good. Good. Thank you, Kurt.
Awesome. Now, you were recommended to me. Was it Buck Hamill that recommended we chat? Does that name sound familiar?
Yes, Buck was serving as an elders quorum president while I was the stake president here in the Wilmington, Delaware Stake.
Wow, awesome. And how long ago were you released as stake president?
This past June. It wasn't soon enough
Oh,
for the
wow.
members of the Delaware Stake, Wilmington, Delaware Stake, I'm sure, but it was
Nice.
a 9-year run and ended this past June.
Now, I'm curious. Maybe we'll just start there. That's 9 years of your life. You kind of forget what life was like not being the stake president or having that calling or identity. And so, what's it been like the last few months, just reorienting yourself to the world and the church and your stake? Has it been easy or tough, or what comes to mind?
Well, I think like a lot of people who've had the blessing of a leadership calling, it's a set of mixed emotions when you're released. On the one hand, it's nice to get your evenings back and to not feel like you're kind of on the run all the time.
Hmm.
Um, but it's such a wonderful opportunity to get to know the saints across a congregation or a set of congregations and to be with them and hear their stories and you fall in love with them and it's hard when you realize, well, I'm not going to have a reason to go to all those congregations anymore when you're stake president,
Yeah.
or at least I felt like I need to be visiting each of those congregations regularly. Now if I show up, they'll say, well, why are you here? So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't just show up, and I miss them. I miss them because I love them.
Yeah.
So I have mixed emotions.
Yeah. And what was the general makeup of your stake as far as how many wards or the geographic layout of it all?
Yeah. Um, well, we had 8 units. The stake had been one of the larger geographic ones, I think, in the country for a while. It was almost the whole Delmarva Peninsula while I was a high
Wow.
councilor. And then they split the stake several years ago, um, and it became a good deal more manageable to get across it, but it was still sizable. It takes in a part of southeast Pennsylvania, part of northeast Maryland, and the northern part of Delaware, the part we call above the canal. So
Hmm.
there are 3 buildings, 8 congregations meeting in those buildings, and that's about the size of it.
Yeah. So on a busy Sunday, are you driving several hours to get from one place to the other, or is it not quite that big?
It's not, from if I were going from visiting people up in the north down to the southern part of the stake, it might take me as uh, close to an hour, but usually you could plan out your day. So a typical Sunday would involve um, an hour and a half or two of driving to get to different buildings and meet different people in different places.
Yeah. Interesting. And what were you doing prior to your time as a stake president?
I served on the Stake High Council for many years. I don't. I think they were kind of wondering what to do with me. So I was on the
Yeah.
Stake High Council. I can't do much damage there. Uh, I served in a couple of bishoprics, in elders quorum presidencies. I was a seminary teacher for 5 years in total, split between two different times when I was in that calling, an early morning seminary teacher and at one point a home study teacher. Um, and always, with a home teaching and a visiting teaching assignment that I was trying to help a spouse out or with ministering. So those are the things.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Now, I'm curious. After 9 years of this, year after year, state conference out of state conference, I'm curious.
Mhm.
Is there anything that comes to mind that you learned from just as far as organizing a state conference? By the end of it, did you have a certain routine? Obviously, you're very prayerful and maybe directions and themes. But what comes to mind if you were to talk to maybe a brand new stake president about the concept of state conference?
Well, you you preside at one a year, and the other has always got a visiting authority. And when the visiting authority comes, you just kind of say, okay, whatever the visiting authority wants, that's the way that's going to be organized. And usually they're, virtually always they're in touch with you and coordinating with you, but often they have an idea about how they want that to run. So one of those state conferences, you're kind of along for the ride and you're learning, which is a great thing. Uh, the one where you as stake president are presiding, that's just a lot of prayer, right? And you pray with your counselors and you confer with the stake council and ask the stake council what they think the saints need to encouragement or teaching or um, some extra, uh, hopefully, inspiration on. And we always do an after general conference discussion and say, okay, well, how do these things that we've learned from the prophets and apostles and other leaders apply in our stake? Like, where can we amplify and echo and strengthen the saints in their desire to follow the prophet from these conferences? And usually our state conference would be um, a couple of months after the April and the October General Conference. So we always had some some new and inspiring and fresh material to try to be looking at. And between those things and the unique circumstances of the state, it wasn't hard to figure out what to talk about. It was hard to figure out what to leave out, right? What was
Yeah.
it? What was most important? Picking the most important and running with that.
Yeah, and I'm curious about these sort of gatherings or discussions after general conference. Was that done just primarily with your stake presidency, or did you include others in that conversation?
Well, we would talk about it in stake presidency, but we would really talk about it also in stake council. You get those brothers and sisters together, and the Holy Ghost descends, and you learn a lot. So those discussions helped. Um, those discussions helped a lot in shaping the things that we wanted to teach in a leadership meeting and the things we wanted to teach in bishopric training and the things we wanted to discuss with the members in the adult session, the Saturday evening session, and the general session.
Awesome, really helpful. Um, you sent over some general principles that, as I always do, setting up these interviews. Just ask, what are two or three principles of leadership that really served you well in your time as a leader? And jumping into those, first one being love and respect the people within your stewardship. But what did that look like on a day to day, week to week basis?
Um, Trying to be with the saints, trying to get an opportunity to visit with them. It's, this is, I'll bet this is a challenging job for you because you have, as you interview people, you're probably hearing the same sorts of things again and again. But for me, it,
You'd be
it,
surprised, but yeah,
yeah,
sure.
didn't get much more complicated than wanting to know who they were, right? Like finding out about these people. I remember when I was set apart, Elder Robert Gay extended the call, and that was a story all by itself. I was on the
Well, let's hear
board.
it. What's the story?
I was uh, an officer in a national lawyers and judges organization called the American Inns of Court, and I was running a meeting on the West Coast. We had a conference in Anaheim, California, and so I couldn't be there for the weekend that they were reorganizing the stake. So they said, well, uh, you can do this by remote, by phone. Uh, and these were the days pre-COVID, before everybody knew how to manage Zoom or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
Um, so I spoke with Elder Gay and the Area 70 who was attending with him on the phone, and I thought this is going to be easy. I thought I knew who the stake president should be. It should be, this one brother in the stake who I knew well professionally. He'd been the CEO of a company where I had worked. He was just as thoughtful and kind and good and spiritual. He was a returned mission president. He's just everything you would want in a stake president, the kind of guy I would crawl over cut glass for. And
Yeah.
so they said, so who do you and he was a counselor in the stake presidency at the time. I said, well, it ought to be brother so and so. And they said, well, anybody else? And I named two or three other brothers. And I thought, that's it for that. And then I got a call in the middle of this meeting. Like, this is a board meeting it was a big board. It was like 30 people, and we were doing strategic planning for the next X years. Said, so I had to excuse myself, step out. And they said, well, what about this? I thought, oh, maybe I'm getting called as a counselor. Well, I got called out 3 or 4 times during the meeting, and then the call got extended. It was like, what? Can you be on a plane back here tomorrow? I said, well, yeah, I can do that.
Oh my goodness.
And Yeah, so I cut the red eye and got back, and I think the members of the stake were nearly as shocked as I was when when they called for the sustaining vote. It was it was it was a pretty big surprise for all of us. But in the blessing that Elder Gay gave me as he set me apart, he said that you will see the people as the Savior does, which is one of the most beautiful things uh, I'd ever heard. That was a remarkable thing to hear that, and it actually came true on many occasions, which uh, was a surprise to me. I always felt like um, President Monson got, more than his share of spiritual. I thought he'd like rattle off these spiritual experiences. And I'd say, I don't get any of those things. He's getting mine. So he's like, who these general authorities are getting? I don't have experiences like that. So I, I wasn't used to the power of spiritual insight that came from time to time associated with the mantle of the calling. It's an extraordinarily humbling thing, and emotionally quite powerful to get just a little bit of a taste of how Heavenly Father and Christ feel about the people in your stewardship.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. I'm curious, just what do you remember from those first few months, or just that first year of finding your footing in this calling? Is there anything specific you tried, or new direction, or uh, things that worked that you thought would work but didn't, or what comes to mind that sort of getting started in the calling?
Well, I had great counselors, including that one brother who I said should be the stake president, and
Oh,
he
nice.
was he was like training wheels for me because he's a great leader, and the Lord knew exactly what he was doing. He was holding that brother in reserve to be uh, the first temple president of the Philadelphia temple, and but I got a few months with him before that call came, and I learned a lot from him, and I learned a lot from my second counselor, another wonderful man, great leader. Uh, there were experienced brothers and sisters on the state council, so a lot of it was trying to uh, understand what the what the stake needed at a level where I hadn't had to really. I mean, like I say, I'd been on the High Council, I'd been in discussions about the needs of the stake, but I hadn't had to think myself, oh, this is the direction that that we this is where the focus of resources really ought to be. So I hope I was listening. I was trying to listen. Um, then I got the sort of strong impression that we really needed to do some reaping and rescuing work. Um, the communities in and around Wilmington had had some difficult financial and economic times uh, when when much of the country was coming out of the 2008 uh, Great Recession. Wilmington had a little tougher time coming out than some other places, uh, and that meant that people who could find better opportunities elsewhere often did. And I think but there was always a core of wonderful saints who were sticking with it here and trying to lift them up and encourage them, and then get us all feeling a little bit of the fire to go out and reap and rescue. And then, regardless of what the circumstances were out there, whether it was a great season for it or a bad season for it, just like keep at it, then return, report, repeat. That was sort of the mantra that came into my mind and that I tried to encourage us as leaders in the stake to work with the wards and branches to move forward with.
Interesting. And I'm curious. Obviously, with the bishops in your stake, they're focusing on a lot of different maybe welfare requests or issues. In conjunction with the relief society president, elders quorum president, those types of things. Does anything come to mind as far as your interaction or encouragement they received, or your involvement with their welfare efforts, or what you saw there? Anything come to mind?
Well, I learned a lot about how different how different leaders respond to their responsibilities. There were and not in ways where you would say, "Oh, that's right and that's wrong," just different. Just how one bishop would take a certain approach to the welfare needs of people who would come to him, and another would take a slightly different approach. And there's a there's a relatively broad spectrum within which you'd say, well, that's perfectly acceptable. And I never had a bishop get where I thought, well, they're outside that. I had one or two where I say to them, well, you might want to talk to brother or sister so and so about X before there's more assistance there, or or maybe you should not be quite as because sometimes you'll have people contact you and say, Bishop so and so's not giving me what I need, and the former bishop was always blah blah blah. And I would say, well, you have a wonderful bishop. You have a wonderful bishop, and he loves you. I know he loves you. You should be listening to what he says. He's got the priesthood keys, and if you pay attention and you follow what he's asking you to do, you're going to find it's going to work out well for you. But some people don't want to hear that. Um, but it did give me an insight from the person's perspective, and that gave me an opportunity when talking to the bishop to say, I'm sure this is not a surprise to you, but this is how Sister X feels or Brother Y feels. And then, I would hear the bishop's perspective on it. And in those circumstances, it was, again, a remarkable thing to see how good the people are. Like the person on the receiving end, they're they're dear, sweet people. Uh, and sometimes life has dealt them a very rough hand. Uh, and the bishops and the Relief Society presidents and Elders Quorum presidents, oh my gosh, they're so wonderful. Like really, really, really trying to do the right things, even when they're getting pushback from the person they're trying to help. So that was an
Yeah,
education. It was an education almost from the start.
yeah. That's helpful. And did you feel any extra pressure during that? As they're focusing on welfare to provide more specific training or resources, or getting the new bishops up to speed, or did you sort of allow that to unfold naturally? Or
No, I got one piece of advice from a former stake president who moved out to Utah but stayed in touch with me, and he said to me something like, "Just remember Uh, it's the it's the bishop's storehouse. I think he was trying to say,
Mm.
like gently, don't you get in there and mess around, because you got to let those brothers handle it. They're on the front line. Remember, it's the bishop's storehouse. And I always tried to keep that in mind. It's not the stake president's storehouse, it's the bishop's storehouse. Um, Trust them, encourage them, and just make sure that the foundational principles are being reinforced regularly enough that everybody knows what they are. Because there's always a rollover in bishopric members, and so you're constantly going back and showing them the video about how to handle the tithes and offerings properly, and the basic, extending assistance in the Lord's way kind of training. But most of the time, not only they didn't need my help, I would look at how they were handling their responsibilities and think, oh my gosh, they're inspired and they're really terrific men.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really helpful advice because there is, the bishops are already sort of losing sleep over the whether they're making the right decision or if they're helping the right ways, and then to have sort of this other authoritative figure like leaning over their shoulder and getting into the details can be that just that one extra layer of pressure. When instead to hear sort of that encouragement or the the communication of trust to the bishop, saying, "Hey, I'm sure you're doing a great job. You're being thoughtful about these decisions. Just move forward in confidence," and that can be very encouraging.
And they were, to a man, and their Relief Society presidents, just astoundingly faithful, wise women. And with the shift in greater responsibility to Elder Quorum presidents, watching them step up and move from being the guy who coordinated moves to being the person managing uh, frontline, very difficult um, temporal needs in coordination with the bishop.
Yeah, really helpful. The next principle is really coordinates well with the concept that Buck mentioned when he recommended that I reach out and do an interview, because he had mentioned that what do you say here, that he's my first priesthood leader I've ever had conduct PPIs with me, and they were each unique and amazing. And you mentioned sort of this, like showing love to those that you lead by showing up in their lives, either personal interviews, worship together, side by side services. So I'm curious in that context of the personal priesthood interviews when you're following up with elders quorum presence and things. Is there any like approach or strategy or tactic you had going in there, or how would you unpack how you handled those things?
I I can only remember one priesthood leader in my uh, life who was really consistent with having priesthood interviews with me, and I never felt like he was being hectoring or nagging me. It just felt like he loved me and he wanted to know how I was doing, and he wanted to know how I was doing with my responsibilities in the church as well as with my family. So I really tremendously respected that man for that, and to the extent I felt, inspiration on anything, I felt this urge to actually meet with the people I had some stewardship over. And so I just tried to make sure we were on a regular schedule. As often as I could, I would try to meet with them in person. At first, I was doing that, with the stake president's office, but pretty soon that felt like, it doesn't work so well. So I was trying to get into the, see if I could see them in their homes. Um, uh, COVID kind of threw a wrench into that for a while. We all got comfortable with Zoom, maybe too comfortable, because then it was easy to stack stuff up and just like knock out four in a night or five in a night, doing back to back on Zoom. And I did that pretty often, but I still felt like, you ought to go out with them. And so I think that some of the most productive ones were where I'd say, look, why don't you come up with uh, two or three people, no more than that, maybe just a couple of people that you think we could visit together, somebody in your quorum who could really use some loving encouragement, and let's go see them together. And then I'd go pick them up, or we'd meet at the church and get in the same vehicle and then go, and then we'd have time to talk together in the car, and we would go see people and we would minister together. And I would watch how they did that, not because they needed help from me, but because I wanted to see how they did it. And I felt like I learned a lot from my elders quorum presidents. They did a beautiful job and they loved the people. And I think it helped them. I hope it helped them that I was along for the ride. Uh, um, so that's how we did it, and I tried to do it on a frequent enough basis that they knew it was not window dressing when I said I love you. I mean it, and that they were persuaded I was in earnest about serving their flock as much as they were in earnest about it.
Yeah. So just going back to having the regular interviews, and I appreciate just the simple advice of just do it, because it can get out of routine, or you feel like, I feel like I just met with that elders quorum president. What would we even talk about? Maybe we can just skip that one. But even if it's a short meeting, you both walk away sort of edified, more connected, and feeling that mutual support for one another in these roles. Is there anything like, did you have any go-to questions as you met with elders quorum presidents or others?
It doesn't feel like, I don't want this to sound trite, but when you really like the people, when you really love them, then it's you're talking to your friends and you're happy to be with them, and it doesn't feel like, oh, this is a chore. It's a great thing to visit. It's how are things going? How's the family? How's work? Tell me about the quorum. What can I help with? Where are the places where you think we could be of assistance? And then that's more the tenor of it. And once in a while, you do need to say, well, how is it going doing your ministering interviews? That'll help if sometimes you got to be giving them a direction and encouragement, but mostly you're just talking to them about life and helping them know that the church has got their back. They're not in this alone.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful, and just that general encouragement and keeping them going. So awesome. The last principle you put here is build faith in Christ by seeing and sharing the manifold and merciful blessings that the saints experience. Tell me more about that.
Well, this kind of goes hand in hand with those last two things, which is the members of the church are amazing. They really are amazing. And when you get to know them, it's so inspiring. And you've talked to people from all over the world. What a cool job you have. So
That is
you
cool. Yeah.
yeah. And here's the thing, it's not just people with fancy titles or leadership positions in the world or in the church. It's all the saints. You get to know them, you get to sit down and visit with them, and you realize you really do get a sense of why God loves them, right? You see the goodness in them and the sacrifices that they've made, the changes in their lives, and you get to understand sometimes just by asking them straight up, what does the atonement mean for you? And you get a testimony uh, that just moves you to tears, and you got to say, other people have to hear this. I can't be the only one who hears this. Can I can I share some of this in stake conference or in a talk in a ward conference? And usually they'll say sure. Almost always they'll say sure. And then you're out there making sure other people hear those things and they realize, well, sister so and so, you know, I've seen her at stake meetings. I had no idea that this happened or that they have this testimony or that this experience changed their life. Or brother so and so, I didn't know he was a convert and I didn't know how he found the church or the church found him and how Holy Ghost moved in his life. When you share those things, it builds faith across the stake, and then the sense of community in the stake is strengthened, and there's a lot of love and appreciation that gets built that way, I think.
Yeah, that's inspiring. I'm curious, what's any Any other future plans now that you're released, or they got you new calling or anything like that?
Well, yeah, we're doing ministering work. I get to do that with my wife now. They're a little more like, so, oh, you two go together. So we're doing
Yeah, cool.
those things, and that's a lot of fun. I'm teaching others quorum, and then I've got, I'm retiring after 22 years in my day job, and so there's a lot of change. We've got 4 new grandbabies this year, so there's excitement on the family front. So 2025 is going to be a big year. Going to be
Oh,
a
that's awesome.
year of new challenges and excitement.
Awesome. Well, I wish you the best, and you deserve it. And I really appreciate our conversation. All we've learned is from your experience. Last question I have for you is: as you think back on your time as a stake president, as a leader, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
Well, that's actually a pretty easy question to answer. I have a new appreciation for. I mean, I always felt like my leaders were well motivated and good people, uh, but I didn't know how much they prayed for the members until I was praying for the members, uh,
Mhm.
and I didn't. And when they would say "I love you," I would sometimes think, "You don't even know me." But I don't think that anymore. I think that's that person probably really does love me. They're getting that same kind of remarkable experience I got, and it helps me want to follow them.